The wind slashes across the Pyrenees like knives hammering the straw walls of a shepherd's hut. Inside, the air bites so hard that even the water jug begins to crust with ice. No fireplace, no chimney, just straw hides and the memory of tricks passed down through generations. In the 14th century, one mistake at night didn't mean a bad sleep, it meant death. And yet peasants survived. They turned fragile huts into pockets of warmth strong enough to outlast the storm. Their secrets weren't luxury, but ingenuity: straw floors that insulated stones that held heat, even dung plastered on walls to seal out the wind. 7 medieval heating hacks that most of us would never imagine tested night after night in a world where freezing wasn't discomfort, it was the enemy. The truth is, medieval peasants weren't just waiting to freeze to death. They had systems strange to us today, but born from trial, error, and generations of stubborn survival. Some of these hacks came from sheer necessity, others from traditions so old no one remembered who invented them. And the evidence isn't guesswork. We see it in manuscripts, in the soot-stained stones of ruined houses, even in the scraps of straw and cloth dug up by archaeologists. So when you imagine those long nights, howling winds, roofs groaning under snow, breath turning white inside a mud hut, remember this: the people inside weren't helpless. They fought back. With tricks so simple you might laugh, but so clever you might try them yourself on your next cold night outdoors. Let's start with the ground beneath their feet, because the first battle against the cold was always the floor. When medieval peasants built their huts, the ground itself was the deadliest enemy. The frozen earth could pull warmth from the body faster than the wind outside. Fires might warm the air, but they couldn't stop cold from seeping upward. That's why straw became their secret weapon. Chroniclers from the 15th century, like the Book of Nurture, described how households scattered rushes and straw across the floors of cottages and halls. This wasn't decoration, it was insulation, an early form of survival engineering. Peasants spread a thick layer of dried straw across the packed earth, sometimes knee-deep. Each hollow stem trapped pockets of still air, creating a barrier that slowed the upward creep of cold. On top of this, they laid animal hides, sheepskin, calfskin, or even patched scraps. The fur side faced upward to trap warmth, while the leather backing blocked damp and wind. The result was a medieval mattress for the whole family. Children nestled into the straw, adults curled beside them, and the ground's lethal chill was kept at bay. Daily maintenance was critical. Straw had to be replaced before it rotted, fluffed to restore air pockets, and kept dry. Without it, no amount of firewood would save them. Think of it as the medieval version of modern camping mats. Today, we roll out insulated foam pads. They rolled out straw. One cost money and factory work. The other cost sweat and a scythe. But the science is the same: stop the cold from stealing heat, and you survive the night. In northern Germany during the 15th century, winters could freeze rivers solid and lock villages in weeks of snow. Firewood was precious, and peasants couldn't afford to waste it on roaring flames all night. That's why they turned to bricks. Chroniclers from Lubeck describe families pulling glowing bricks from their hearths, wrapping them in thick cloth, and slipping them beneath blankets or into crude wooden shoes. Unlike wood-fired clay, had thermal mass. It could store heat for hours, releasing it slowly, like a primitive battery. A brick placed near the feet meant circulation didn't stop in the coldest part of the body. Smaller tiles warmed hands, stiff from work, tucked inside sleeves, or cupped against the chest. The science was simple but brilliant. Bricks absorb radiant energy from fire, then bleed it back into the air and skin long after the flames have died. Modern tests show a brick can radiate usable heat for up to 6 hours after removal from coals. For a peasant, that meant sleeping through the night without waking to rekindle the fire. Think of it as the medieval version of chemical hand warmers. Today, we rip open a packet and shake it. In the 1400s, you shoved a hot brick in your bed and prayed it didn't scorch your toes. Different tools, same principle: store heat, ration it carefully, and you cheat the cold for just a little longer. Medieval England, 13th century. Shepherds huddled on icy fields wrapped in wool cloaks that looked more like blankets than coats. But here's the trick. They didn't just drape them loosely. They clasped them tight. The Maciejowski Bible, a manuscript from the mid-1200s, shows peasants pinning cloaks with simple brooches or knots pulling fabric across the chest and throat. That little detail changed everything. Instead of flapping in the wind, the cloak became a sealed shell. The air trapped between fabric and skin formed an insulating layer, slowing heat loss the same way modern winter jackets use baffles. It wasn't fashion, it was survival. A cloak pinned wrong meant cold air pouring in heat leaking out. Pinned right, it was the difference between shivering through the night and making it home alive. And shepherds knew it. They carried bronze pins or bone toggles as essential gear, as important as their crook. Science makes it obvious. Still, air is insulation. A pinned cloak creates microclimates around the body pockets of trapped warmth. The tighter the seal, the less convection steals heat. It's primitive physics, but brutally effective. Today, we zip our parkas and pull Velcro straps. Back then, you stabbed a pin through wool and hoped it held. Different tool, same principle. Don't let warm air escape. Lock it in. Shepherds mastered that centuries before anyone invented a North Face jacket. In Scandinavia during the 14th century, many peasant longhouses had no chimney at all. When the fire was lit in the central hearth, smoke didn't rise neatly out of a flue, it filled the entire house. To a modern eye, it looks unbearable. Families crouched low eyes, watering the rafters blackened with soot. But the smoke was more than discomfort. It was insulation. Archaeological digs of Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian homes reveal blackened roof beams and layers of soot preserved for centuries. The smoke trapped beneath the thatch slowed heat loss, coating fibers with resin and sealing gaps where cold air might creep in. It warmed the air near the ceiling, creating a buffer zone that radiated back downward. In effect, peasants were living inside their own chimney, wrapped in a cloud of heated air. Science explains the strange efficiency. Smoke particles absorb radiant heat, while the trapped layer of hot gases acts as a secondary blanket. Without chimneys, much of the warmth stayed indoors. Yes, it stung the eyes and lungs, but it also meant fewer frozen corpses in the morning. Today, we call it poor ventilation and install carbon monoxide detectors. Back then, it was simply survival. Living in a smoke-filled longhouse was like trading comfort for life itself. Cough, tear, and endure, because the alternative was silence in the snow. Picture a storm in the Basque Mountains, 14th century. The fire is dying, the wind shrieks through the cracks, and the hut is nothing but straw and desperation. The shepherd doesn't reach for another log. He reaches for his flock. Historical accounts and folk tradition across the Pyrenees describe peasants bringing lambs and sometimes full-grown sheep straight into their huts on freezing nights. It sounds absurd, crowded, smelly, noisy. But it worked. Sheep are furnaces on 4 legs. Their body temperature runs hotter than ours, and when pressed together, they radiate warmth like living coals. Science confirms the logic. The average sheep gives off 250-300 watts of heat, roughly the same as a small space heater. 2 or 3 animals curled beside a family meant the difference between frostbite and survival. Combined with straw bedding and heavy hides, the hut became less a shelter and more a giant breathing survival pod. Today, we buy electric blankets. In the 14th century, you let a lamb crawl under the covers. Not glamorous, not comfortable, but effective. And while modern survivalists debate gear weight and battery life, medieval peasants had a simpler metric: if it bleats, it heats. If there is one part of the body that betrays you fastest in the cold, it's the feet. Frozen ground creeps upward, numbing toes, halting circulation, and dragging the whole body into hypothermia. Medieval peasants knew this truth better than anyone. That's why they wrapped, stuffed, and layered their feet, like their lives depended on it, because they did. Archaeological finds from Novgorod, Russia, dating from the 12th to 15th centuries, reveal countless fragments of Port Yankee square cloth foot wraps alongside shoes packed with straw. Instead of socks, peasants wound strips of linen or wool tightly around their feet, then slipped them into crude boots lined with dried grass. The straw absorbed sweat, trapped air, and insulated against frozen soil. When it grew damp, it was replaced daily, sometimes even twice a day. Science explains the ingenuity. Still air within fibers is insulation, and straw provides both cushioning and thermal pockets. Combined with multiple cloth layers, it created a system not far from modern moisture-wicking socks paired with insulated boots. The peasants had no Gore-Tex, but they had grass, and it worked. Today, hikers pay good money for layered merino socks and synthetic liners. In the 14th century, you cut strips of cloth and shoved hay in your shoes. Less glamorous, more itchy, but life-saving. If your toes stayed warm, you lived to see morning. If not, you might not see anything again. Ready for the most controversial hack of them all? Sheep dung. Yes, walls smeared with animal waste. In the Scottish Highlands, medieval crofters didn't waste what came out of their sheep. They mixed dung with straw, packed it into gaps between stones, or plastered it over thatch roofs. The result, a surprisingly durable, surprisingly warm insulation layer. It hardened like clay, sealed out wind, and trapped heat inside. Sounds disgusting, sure, but it worked. Archaeological records and folk accounts describe homes lined with dung, daub a patchwork of manure and fibers. Science backs it the organic matter reduced airflow, while the fibrous straw trapped still air, slowing heat loss. In other words, peasants turned the grossest byproduct of survival into survival itself. Now compare it to today. Spray foam insulation in your attic, fiberglass stuffed in your walls. Same principle. Think of it this way. Fibers with a binder trap. Air-trapped air becomes insulation, and insulation means warmth. The medieval version just smelled worse, and when dried, even the smell faded. Picture it, a freezing night wind clawing at your hut. You're alive because the walls are literally smeared with sheep poop. That's not romantic. That's raw survival. So here's the real question. Would you sleep inside a dung-lined house if it meant the difference between life and death? Or would you take your chances with the cold? We've walked through straw floors, glowing bricks, smoky rooms, even walls smeared with dung. Strange, maybe. Effective, absolutely. For medieval peasants, none of this was optional. It was survival. And here's the truth, they never relied on just one trick. It was always a system, layer upon layer. Straw underfoot stones by the fire cloaks, tight sheep pressed close boots, packed walls sealed, each piece small, but together they built something stronger than the storm outside. It makes you wonder. We chase comfort with gadgets and gear. They chased life itself with knowledge, memory, and grit. Which one lasts longer when the fire finally goes out? Morning breaks, and the storm finally loosens its grip. Snow piles high against doors and windows, but inside families stir. Shepherds rise, and smoke drifts faintly into the pale sky. They survived, not because of luck, not because of comfort, but because of knowledge. Every hack we've uncovered, straw floors, heated bricks, cloak clasping smoke-filled rooms, sleeping with sheepfoot wraps, even dung-packed walls, was no accident. These were systems tested across centuries, sharpened by necessity. For medieval peasants, winter wasn't an inconvenience, it was war, and these tricks were their weapons. Now look at us. We complain when the thermostat is off by 2 degrees. We wrap ourselves in fleece, charge our heated blankets, and still shiver. Meanwhile, a farmer in the 14th century trudged through a blizzard in nothing but wool grit and memory. So who's really fragile, us or them? That's the lesson hidden in these medieval survival hacks. Survival doesn't come from what you buy. It comes from what you remember. Gear breaks, batteries die, but knowledge endures. So tell me, which hack shocked you the most? Sleeping pressed against sheep, breathing air thick with smoke, or smearing dung into your walls? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to see where you draw the line between genius and madness. And if you want more tested medieval survival wisdom, the kind that kept ordinary people alive when nature turned hostile, hit subscribe. Because the next storm, whether in the 14th century or today, always comes sooner than you think.